I had an old guitar sitting around that I decided might make a good steampunk project. I dug through my collection of brass gears and started laying out some ideas. Right away, I knew I wanted the volume and tone knobs to have gears behind them. I also knew I wanted some elaborate scroll work and the cover plate. To help me figure out the design, I took pictures of the parts to work out the scrolling on the computer. By laying them out with a black backdrop, I'm able to get a nice clean picture that I can use to mock up on the computer. After I have the pictures imported into my program, I'm able to start playing around with ideas. At first I started by just drawing, and then eventually I switched over to working with vector graphics, which was a lot easier and a lot more precise. I was able to get the curves and angles just perfect around all the screw holes. I also played around with some scrolling on the main body. This was a lot of trial and error, seeing if I could eventually work something out. In the end, I had something I was happy with. I transferred it all over to the computer from which I plot and cut it all on Paint Mask. This I carefully weeded out and put onto the backing plate. First, I did have to do texture in the background, so I used the wet paint and plastic method, where you put paint down and right away put plastic on it and peel it off to leave a texture. After the paint dried, I put the stencil on and did a very light coating of more paint, which left just enough showing through that there was multiple layers of texture. Carefully peeling off the stencil, it revealed a really nice subtle design in the cover plate. I think it turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. I also decided I wanted to take some gears and have them inlaid into the main part of the body. This required some kind of fine routering. After I outlined it, I routed out the hole, and sure enough, the gears fit in just perfectly. I painted the neck of the guitar the same way I painted the cover plate. First a base coat and then some wet coating that I textured with plastic. After I had the base coat on the main body, I started laying it out so I could get a feel for what I wanted to do with the rest of it. Laying out the brass gears and a piece of the clock that I had cut out, I started to get a feel for what I wanted to do. I even had an old watch that I was going to turn into something that looked like a gauge. I got the gears drilled out so that they would have the volume and tone knobs fit through them. I did make sure to take a picture of the wiring so I would know how to put it back together when I was done. There had been some loose wiring in the guitar that I fixed when I did the project, but that wasn't my chief concern. Although it is a functional guitar, I do want to have it more as a display piece for myself. The one thing I didn't have was a knob. So I did take some brass and made two half spheres that I soldered together to make the knob for the toggle switch on the guitar. Soldering them was done in a fairly simple way. I simply put flux on them and stuck a little piece of solder inside and heated the thing up, and the solder just flowed in, and suddenly I had a sphere all soldered together. I was pretty happy with how that came out. After I was done soldering it, I did have to grind it and smooth out the edges a little bit. I did that carefully with my Dremel. And I had a few other ornamental brass pieces that I wanted to use, and I cut them out with a shear and then pounded them flat. But I also wanted to give them some texture, so I took the ball peen hammer and just kept hitting the thing till I had a nice texture in them. And I did have some protective plastic over the metal. When I peeled it off, I had a nice looking shiny piece of textured metal. Next was to do the scrolling for the main body of the guitar. I carefully placed my stencil where I wanted it. And after it was down, I added some more masking. After a nice subtle coat of paint, I peeled off the masking and was left with a real nice scroll work. To make the whammy bar and to keep it looking kind of industrial the way Steampunk does, I took a threaded rod and bent it to shape and gave it a textured paint job. I printed out a gauge to put inside the watch. This is something I worked up on the computer and just put it in there to make the watch look like a gauge. Just a little bit of hot glue in the back to make it stay in there. Final assembly involved just carefully putting all the parts together. Carefully nailing in the little ornamental pieces. Finally, I had to resolder the guitar. That was something that had been wrong with it that I was fixing as long as I was doing everything else to it. finally putting the neck on, putting the last screws in, and it's looking pretty good. And there's my steampunk guitar. This was a Bridgetown Steamworks video.